I have been impressed with the organization of this event, with the host of speakers that you've had to date, and I'm excited for you of what your afternoon is going to hold. So thank you again for inviting me and for letting me to be a part of the entire morning. I did resonate with a comment that Command Sergeant Major Kahlberg just made. Before I get to my prepared remarks, I would tell you that I too, as I was growing up, would have probably run away had somebody said, we're going to have a meeting all day long dedicated to women, and we want the preponderance of women in your organization to attend. I grew up in an era that it was important to me, and you'll hear this in my speech, not to be recognized for my gender, to be recognized for the contributions that I could make to mission accomplishment. Can I tell you, my thinking changed. Let's see, it's been about maybe 5-6 years ago now, when it was really the Navy that started the Women's Leadership Symposium. They expanded it to all services, and they asked me to come at some point, I think it was in 2009, to be one of the speakers for their event. So I would tell you, again, I've spent my career not really wanting to do that. I decided I was the senior most ranking woman in the Air Force at the time. I was a 3-star general, and I thought I need to own up and step up and do this. I went, and I would tell you, I had an epiphany. I had an epiphany. I think that the women in service today are hungry for the opportunity to interact with those who've gone before and to have this kind of a forum where they can learn and grow. So I wanted to start by thanking you for giving women and men, I know we have a fair percentage of men in this audience, this opportunity to figure their way forward. A lot of it will be through mentoring, a lot of it will be through the opportunity to interact with those folks who have gone before. Some of it is networking, getting to know your peers. Some of it is just learning about the opportunities that are available to you. So thank you. I just start with thank you. So what I thought I'd spend my time with you this morning talking about is kind of my perspective on the role of women in our military kind of throughout our country's existence, a little bit of a historical look back. I'll share with you some of my personal story. I don't do that all the time when I give speeches, but given the topic that we are here to talk about today, I thought it might help you to kind of see some of the journey that I have been on, and I'll kind of close with some of my perspectives on some of the changes that I have seen just in my lifetime relative to, in particular, gender diversity. I'll talk a little bit about the breadth of the topic of diversity, but in particular about gender diversity. So when you think about our country, you have to come to the realization that women have been participating and making impact in our military activities all the way back to when we were first formed as a country, all the way back to the Revolutionary War. So when you think about the roles women have played, it certainly has evolved. I'd say women started off in sort of the non-participant passive support role. They moved into a more active support role. They began assuming non-combat duties to free men to go fight, to the more recent involvement really throughout a whole host of career opportunities, culminating here in this mandate to allow women to participate in all career fields with that rescission of the executive order that General Nash talked to about women's support and participation in the ground combat duties. A huge evolution since we have started, but participation throughout, and I would stipulate that in every era, women have had an important and substantial impact on achieving victory for our nation. So not only have the roles evolved, I would say that our culture has evolved in our country as well, and particularly in that acceptance of diversity, of the role that women can play in our military. And I think it's been moving in a positive direction ever since the Revolutionary War. So I have to tell you that when I think about that, I think women wearing the uniform today owe a huge debt of gratitude to those who went before us, all the way back to the Revolutionary War. Some of those predecessors in our room today. I personally feel that that's true. I do owe that debt of gratitude to those who went before. You know, it was back in the 70s, I'd say, that that whole discussion and culture change on women's equality really started to take hold in our country. It drove changes throughout our military services, and certainly it opened a door for me personally. So General Nash mentioned that we used to have a WAC, and in the Air Force, Women's Air Corps, in the Air Force, it was a Women's Air Force organization. It was in the 70s that we moved away from those uniquely gender-specific organizations and allowed women to participate for the first time fully as members of each one of our services. It was in 1970 that the Department of Defense promoted their first female general officers, both of them in the Army. One in the Army Nurse Corps, Brigadier General Anna May, and the other in the WAC, in the Women's Air Corps, or Army Corps, Brigadier General Elizabeth Hoisington. And it was around that same time that those advocates for equality and change were lobbying Congress to allow women to enter into our service academies for the first time. So that truly is where my life takes a dramatic turn, if I'm telling you my personal life story. It's not only my life. I would stipulate that it affected the lives of a lot of women, one of whom is in our room today, Colonel retired Sandy Carlson, who I knew as Sandy Derulo when we were entering into the Air Force Academy for the first time. She was a classmate of mine, and so Sandy, I'm going to tell our story here in the first part of my journey, not just my story. But I would start with my story with the fact that my dad was an Air Force officer, so I was an Air Force brat. Maybe some of you all are children of parents that served in one of the different services. So you all understand that the kind of upbringing that results in. We moved around quite a bit as I was growing up. My dad actually happened to be stationed when I was in high school, right where I am stationed today. That's kind of cool. I'm a graduate of Beaver Creek High School in Dayton, Ohio. The whole community now has embraced me as their hometown girl done good because I'm a high school graduate of their local area. So it was in my senior year in high school in October of 1975 that my dad came home from work one day and told me that Congress had just passed legislation that permitted women to enter the service academies for the first time. And so for me, it was an unexpected opportunity. I would share with you, I don't know that as a senior I was necessarily thinking of following in my dad's footsteps. I was certainly interested in going to college, was maybe going to enter into one of the ROTC programs that might have been available. But so this unexpected opportunity had presented itself, and so I thought, well, I'm just going to think of it as a challenge. I'm going to see if I can get in, and if I can get in, I'm going to see how well I could do. So I applied, and I was accepted. So I do have to set the stage just a little bit by noting that despite the fact that my dad was in the Air Force and that I'm an Air Force brat, I really didn't have a clue about what the service academies were all about. So I asked my dad, and he's not an academy grad, but here's how my dad described this, and maybe some of you will resonate with this. He said, they're going to strip you of all of your rights and hand them back to you one at a time. So I was a pretty righteous high school senior. I recall telling my dad, Dad, I am an American citizen and no one can take my constitutional rights from me. So you're laughing because you know my dad was far more right than I was on that, right? He was absolutely right, which is what I came to learn as I entered into the Air Force Academy. It was on the 26th of June, 1976 that I and 157, one of those being Sandy Derulo, now Carlson, entered the Air Force Academy as the first female students. It was in that same year that West Point inducted 119 women in their first class. The Annapolis, the Naval Academy, inducted 81 women into their first class, and the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut, brought in 38 women into their first class. So I arrived at the Air Force Academy campus by bus. I was leaving home for the first time. I had taken an airplane from Dayton, Ohio to Colorado Springs. First time I'd ever flown in an airplane, certainly first time I've ever flown alone on an airplane. Checked myself into a hotel by myself for the first time. The Academy had arranged for buses to pick folks up at designated hotels. So that's how I arrived to the Academy by bus. And you know, I arrived, the bus drops all the incoming cadets at the same place every year. It's at the base of what was then called the Bring Me Men ramp. Those words were in huge letters at the ramp that leads up into the cadet area. And so you do have to appreciate the irony. I did at the time. Really, I'm in the first class of women, and that's the first thing I saw. Bring me men. Now, there's a lot of heritage and tradition that goes with those words. It's from a poem. And can I tell you this? From 1976, when women first arrived, it took until 2004 to change those words. Decades later, those words came down. A lot of heritage and tradition, and we love that in our military. And now we have those big words on that ramp are our core values in our Air Force. So integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. So now they are far more gender diverse in terms of the first words that you see, and the most important words you could see as you arrive at that great institution for the first time. So now let me tell you that I remember that very first day at the academy, I was walking along a hallway in one of the dorms. We were doing issue, which means you're lugging a ton of stuff, you know, as they're giving you all kinds of things that you're going to need for that first summer there. And I remember chit-chatting with another woman that I just happened to meet. We were going to get to know each other. It's going to be a huge opportunity for us. And an upperclassman that I would stipulate just didn't get that memo that training wasn't quite yet to begin, proceeded to stop us, physically threw us up against a wall, got within an inch of our faces, and yelled something to the effect of, "What the hell are you doing talking in my hallway?" It seemed like it went on forever. He eventually left, at which point I turned to that newfound friend and I said to her, "He must be having a bad day." Yeah, so that was my sobering introduction to the next 4 years at the Air Force Academy, and I think it is safe to say I was in a state of shock that entire first summer, which in hindsight might not have been a bad way to get through that experience that first summer. Now, thinking historically here, it's probably shouldn't be a surprise to anybody in the audience that there were some male cadets, some percentage of the cadet wing, who firmly believed that Congress was wrong to allow women to attend their academy. And I have to tell you, a few of them made it their personal calling to prove that point. I had one of them actually stop me as we're marching along at attention along the marble strips of the academy and tell me that he intended to demonstrate that women did not belong at the academy so that Congress would reverse their decision and the academy could revert to an all-male institution. Wow. So you know what? I thought about it then, I've thought about it since, and I really believe that at least for some of those men who were at the academy, their fear was that the standards would have to be lowered as a result of women becoming a part of the cadet wing. And so then, if the standards were lowered, their resulting experience would be diminished. So I have to tell you, I, along with those other 157 women, spent 4 years proving that the standards didn't have to be lowered. That women can not only survive, but can thrive in that very, very challenging environment. Now, I say that, and you all know that there are certain physical fitness kinds of things that differentiate the genders, right? Men have more upper body strength than women, but the academy just really mirrored what was going on in the whole of the Air Force institution in terms of those physical fitness standards. That would be the only exception that I would tell you relative to what the all-male cadet wing was used to. It would have been the physical fitness standards which were embraced throughout the Air Force. So people are sometimes curious about the number of women who enrolled, those 157, and the number who ultimately graduated in that first class. And so we start with 157. That was about 10% of the incoming class when I went. Sandy and I both went. It was about a 1,500 person class size, and so the Air Force decided to bring in 10% of that first class as women. We graduated on the 28th of May, 1980 with 97 women. So 157 down to 97. But can I tell you, we still graduated with about 10% of the class. So the normal attrition rate for an all-male class was to bring in 1,500 to graduate right around 1,000. So we were actually in that first class, we hit about the same mark that they had experienced with all-male classes. There's an interesting historical note that the class, women in the class of 1981, the class that was just right behind, they actually had a much higher attrition rate than our class. And I think it's because women in the class of 1980, in that first class, we were constantly being held up as as pioneers, and as a result, I have to tell you, we were watched really closely. It was almost like living in a fishbowl. Media were standing at the gates of the Academy grounds waiting to hear the stories of women that raised their hand and said, gee, this is not really how I want to spend my college career. And I actually often thought that it was harder to raise your hand and ask to leave because they would put you through all this scrutiny and questions to make sure that is really what you wanted to do than it was just to gut it out and stay. So I gutted it out and stayed, and I am way excited about that. So the class that came behind us, I think because they didn't have that same notoriety, it had already been done before, it was less newsworthy. I think that might be one of the reasons that they actually had a higher attrition rate than our class. You know, I'm sometimes asked if I would do it over again, given the opportunity. And my answer is always yes. If I were that young and naive again. I have to tell you, I just don't think I could withstand the rigors at this point in my life. And it did take me a little bit of time after I graduated to kind of crystallize in my mind what the value of my academy experience was. So here it is. I have concluded that the academy, and I would tell you, I think many of our training programs throughout our military services placed me and all the cadets in situations that really stretched us in any way you can think about it. Physically, emotionally, mentally, academically. And for me, I came out on the other end of those experiences realizing that I am far more capable than I ever thought I could be. And that knowledge brought with it a self-confidence, a sure confidence in myself, and I don't think it's an ego, it is a confidence in myself that I have relied on ever since, throughout my professional military career and actually in my personal life. So I can't even put a value on my academy experience. It was a wonderful start to my career. In hindsight, I know it was a milestone for women, although I have to tell you, I don't think any of us in that first class of women really noted that at the time. We were excited to get into what was continually characterized as the real Air Force once we got out of the academy. I was excited to get to my first active duty assignment. So throughout my career, just like the Command Sergeant Major said, I have wanted to be recognized not for being a woman, but for working hard and accomplishing the mission. And I have done the very best I could at every job my Air Force has given me. So sometimes I get asked, you know, to what would I attribute my success? And so for all of you in the audience, I got to tell you, my recipe is really simple. It starts with what I just said, doing the very, very best you can do at whatever your service asks of you. Right? I never have tried to orchestrate my career. I've done whatever my Air Force asked me. And can I tell you, there's one other piece to this. You got to bring a positive attitude with you to work every day. Here's my theory on your attitude. It's a choice. It's a personal choice. I maintain that a lot of times you don't have control over what life brings, again, either professionally or personally. You always have a choice in how you react. And if you consciously choose to try to be positive, to take the positive reaction versus a negative, I gotta tell you, it's pretty powerful. Not only for you personally, but when you get a chance to lead others, if you got a positive attitude that you bring, it makes others around you positive as well. And if you got a group of folks that are working hard to do their very best at their mission and they're bringing a positive attitude, you can't help but succeed. That's my simple recipe for success. All right. So I have been very fortunate throughout my career to have been given positions that were challenging, exciting, on the cutting edge, and always worth the hard work invested. I have served, as we noted during the introduction, in the acquisition business for most of my 35 years in the Air Force. I have had the great good fortune to have, I always say, my fingerprints on the leading edge fighter, bomber, and transport aircraft in our inventory today. They'll be in the inventory for decades to come. I worked for about 8 years on the F-22 program in several different capacities. I worked on the B-2 program. In fact, I got a chance to run that program for the Air Force. Awesome bomber capability that's in our fleet today. Spent about 3 years, 3 years, running the C-17 program for the Air Force. Had the opportunity to work at the Pentagon. I would highly encourage those of you who are thinking of a long-time career in service to your country that it really is an education to get a chance to be stationed at the Pentagon or to have the opportunity to go there in a temporary duty status. I think you learn how decisions get made at the senior-most levels within our Department of Defense, and you get an understanding of how you need to interact with our elected elected officials in Congress, I would tell you that I did that 3 times. I think 1 time would be sufficient for most people. Most time would be sufficient. And then my career actually culminates, and I have to tell you, I am 7 weeks away as of yesterday from retiring. It's a bittersweet kind of a thing. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I hit that 3-year mark in June, in the first part of June, and in our Air Force, we tend to allow folks to serve for about 3 years, and then I do believe this, it's time to move on and let the next leader who will serve behind me to step up and to get a chance to operate at this level. So it was 3 years ago, in June of 2012 then, that I was promoted to the rank of 4-star and put in charge of Air Force Material Command, which I have to tell you, I maintain as a job that my Air Force has trained me to do for the last 3 and now a half decades. It was absolutely an honor and a privilege. I tell myself that every day. I make myself pinch myself and tell myself every day it is an honor and a privilege to get to serve at this level and to get to run a command that is just so awesome in terms of what we provide to the United States Air Force, ultimate to the nation. So I got to tell you, some of my days it takes me till really late before I say, oh yeah, I forgot to pinch myself and say it's an honor and a privilege, but I do it every day, every day. So you've heard a little bit about my command. I'll tell you just in a thumbnail what we're all about. So 80,000 people, one of the largest major commands, in fact, kind of running neck and neck with Air Combat Command in the Air Force as the largest commands. 80,000 people, about 40% of the budget for the Air Force. Huge responsibility. We own the S&T mission, Science and Technology mission for the Air Force Research Laboratory. It is all about ensuring our world-class scientists and engineers are focused on not only today's needs from a technology perspective, responding to COCOMs, putting things out in the fight today, but also ensuring that we're focused on game changers for the future. So how are we going to fight wars differently decades from now? It's a huge responsibility. I have the responsibility in my command for, we call it life cycle management. It is cradle to grave. Once our operational side of our Air Force says they don't have something that they need, they issue a requirement. We go through this extensive process to figure out what those requirements should be, then decide which weapon system is going to be the right one to respond to those requirements. We go through the development, the design, the development, the manufacture, the fielding, the support, ultimately disposal. All that cradle to grave responsibility is within that life cycle management mission that I'm responsible for the Air Force. I have the development, test, and evaluation mission for the Air Force, so it is all about test pilots and test engineers wringing out those warfighting capabilities before we deliver them, so we're sure they do what they were intended to do. And I have a mission of sustainment for the Air Force, so I own the depots, the folks that do the organic depot maintenance. There are 3 of them in the Air Force. And in that sustainment mission, we're responsible for supply chain management, for doing 24/7, getting pieces and parts wherever they're needed throughout our enterprise. Those things have all been centralized within my command. They used to be decentralized, several of those, and we've now centralized them within the command. And now most recently, we're taking a page out of the Army and the Navy's book, and we're centralizing our oversight of installations in the Air Force. We have 77 of them, and so that's another responsibility that I've just been handed in Air Force Material Command. It is exciting stuff, and I got to tell you, our Air Force doesn't do the job that it needs to do without the work that my airmen do day in and day out, and I am privileged to get a chance to do what I do. Well, so now let me circle back to diversity in the Air Force. And so now I'll focus in on the Air Force because that's what I know best. And I'm going to read some words to you. I don't generally don't like to read during a speech, but let me just read some words to you because I think they're really illustrative about the approach that the Air Force has taken relative to diversity. Here's how we define diversity. It is a composite of individual characteristics, experiences, and abilities consistent with our Air Force core values and mission. Diversity includes, but is not limited to, personal life experiences, geographic background, socioeconomic background, cultural knowledge, educational background, language abilities, physical abilities, philosophical and spiritual perspectives. All of those things before you get to what is typically referred to in diversity: age, race, ethnicity, and gender. So we've defined diversity very, very broadly in the Air Force. And here's our key message about diversity. To remain the world's premier Air Force, we must attract, recruit, develop, mentor, and retain the best possible talent. Embracing each airman's strengths, perspectives, and capabilities will help build and sustain a diverse, inclusive culture that strengthens our service. For the Air Force to gain the most from diversity, airmen must understand they are valued and have the opportunity to reach their full potential while contributing to the mission of the Air Force. Okay, that's all I'm going to read to you. But I did want to share that with you because I'm really proud of the broad approach that we have taken to understanding that it is our responsibility to embrace the value that comes from all of those different lanes of experience and background in making sure that we can best accomplish our mission. So I think it was our Command Sergeant Major who just said that that the Air Force has embraced a number of tools in the toolkit, and we've got now our second Secretary of the Air Force, who's a woman, the Honorable Debbie James, and she is very focused on diversity in the Air Force and intends to, I think, drive change and real difference during her tenure. So just recently, she and our Chief of Staff, General Welch, issued a memorandum that embraced a whole host of things that we're putting in place now that really get after continuing this journey in terms of diversity. So we've now chartered our development teams. We have development teams that are standing bodies who are responsible for our officer, enlisted, and civilian workforce to do analysis within each of their functional lanes to understand where the barriers are in embracing diversity. So that's one of the charges that was given recently by our chief and our secretary. The secretary will now issue in her promotion board MOI, it's a memorandum of instruction, so every board that convenes on the officer side in the Air Force, they react to these instructions that our secretary issues to them. They must mandatorily react to those instructions. While our secretary is going to begin putting in that promotion MOI, promotion board MOI, an instruction to find officers who have demonstrated that they will nurture and lead in a diverse, inclusive Air Force culture. That's a change. We have the Career Intermission Program that the Command Sergeant Major mentioned, which is an opportunity to leave active service for 1 to 3 years because of personal things that are in your life that are more important, not just focused on women. It's open to all ranks and to both genders, so that people who feel as though they're at a point in their lives where they need to have a different course that they want to pursue can do that, and should they decide, can come back in within 1 to 3 years. We are identifying enlisted airmen for officer training school because we find that we recruit a fairly broad, diverse workforce, but the challenge becomes the upward mobility of that workforce. And so the thinking is that if we find some very capable enlisted airmen that are suited to become officers, perhaps we can attract those folks to head on over and become an officer and hope to retain better for the future. You know, we had for the ROTC program a different standard for the rated height screening. This is if you want to be an operator in the Air Force. So we've decided that we have eliminated more than 1/3 of our female cadets and a number of our male cadets because we had a very restrictive seating rated height screening mandate. We're changing that. We started to use panels now in our civilian hiring process, so no longer can a supervisor just say, I pick that person to come in to fill a vacancy on the civilian side of our Air Force. We now have a panel, and the panel is chartered to have a diverse slate from which to start their adjudication process for who they're going to choose for some of our senior-most civilian positions. We are increasing our female officer applicant pool. So today we're about 25% of the incoming classes in any of those accession opportunities in our Air Force. We're bumping that up to 30%. We are changing our post-pregnancy deployment deferral program. Today it has been, we're allowed to, our women to have 6 months of recovery time before they are vulnerable for deployment. We're extending that to a full year. I have to tell you, a lot of women need that amount of time to really get after getting back to their pre-pregnancy opportunities in terms of physical capabilities. And the last one I'll mention is, the last one, it was in the Secretary's memo, is a focus on mentoring, and we've talked some about that already this morning. We're formalizing through a tool that we're going to make available to all airmen this ability to foster and get after figuring out how we can more formally mentor all of our airmen. So those are the mandated initiatives that are being put in place now to more fully embrace diversity in our Air Force. Can I give you my personal take on diversity? I have simplified this based on my experience. Here's how I think about diversity and why it is so important. I maintain I do not have the market cornered on good ideas. And if I surround myself only by people who think the way I think there will be many, many good ideas that I will never pursue because I can think just like those other people who I surround myself with. It's only when I surround myself by people who think differently. And what drives people to think differently than me? They come from different backgrounds. They come from different experience bases. When I surround myself by people who think differently, I maintain we have a much higher probability of being wide, casting that net wide to figure out opportunities that are ahead of us to best execute our mission sets. So I am truly proud to have been a part of an organization throughout my career, really throughout my career, that has placed an emphasis on diversity. Here more recently, as I get to the end of my career, a huge focus on diversity. And I maintain that I truly have been a beneficiary of that approach, of that embracing the importance of that aspect of being a part of the United States Air Force. So I thought I'd come full circle at the end of my talk with you to share with you the changes that I have seen over the course of my career. I call it in my lifetime in the United States Air Force. It's really illuminating, the changes that I've seen. So when I first commissioned in 1980, women made up about 10% of the Air Force, which is why the Air Force Academy brought in 10% of that first class of women to be women. So fast forward to today, so here 35 years later from when I commissioned, and we've about doubled that. We're at about 19% in the Air Force. I think we lead the other services a little bit in that regard. So that's substantial in my lifetime, to double, almost double the amount of women in our Air Force. Is that representative of the demographics in this country? No. So we're not done. We're not done. But it's huge progress in my lifetime. When I entered the Academy in 1976, there was still an executive order from 1951 on the books that gave the services, all of them, permission to discharge a woman if she became pregnant, gave birth to a child, or became a parent through adoption or becoming a step-parent. In my lifetime, that executive order was on the books. Sometimes when I have the opportunity to speak to women's forums, I've had women who've served in one of the different services come up to me afterwards and say that they were caught in that very executive order and they were forced to a different career path than they would have chosen because it was on the books. So today, we not only have maternity leave for women, we have paternity leave for men. Huge progress, right? Huge progress in that lane. When I first came on active duty, there were several career fields that were closed to women, and in the Air Force, our lifeblood is in the pilot lane, and we were just opening up some of the cockpits to women as that first class of women went through the Air Force Academy. So lots and lots of career opportunities were not available. So now you fast forward to today, and in the Air Force, we're at 99%. 99%, and have been for a while, of our career fields are open to women. We only have 6 career fields that today are not open, and they're all in the special ops lane. And as the General mentioned, it was in January of 2013 that our then SecDef rescinded that 1994 direct combat, ground combat exclusion rule for women, which is effectively removing the primary obstacle for women to enter into many of those career fields across the services. I know all the services are working on it. I know specifically that the Air Force has got a huge focus on figuring out for those 6 career fields that are not today open to women, how do we go about being gender neutral in terms of the standards required to be in those career fields. I like that. We're focused on gender neutrality, so anybody that is capable will be allowed to enter those career fields. And you know what they're doing? I'm not doing it, it's our special ops community that's doing this. They're taking a hard look at how those standards were set in the first place. So we had standards that were based on how fast you could run a certain distance, how many pull-ups you could do, and push-ups, sit-ups, and other things like that. Well, they're changing those to better reflect the actual physical requirements to execute that mission. mission. Some of those missions required an ability to carry a certain amount of weight. So we're changing that to make sure that those folks that are going to pass whatever that Minn threshold is, male or female, can actually physically execute that mission that's going to be required of them. And then I'll finish up with relative to career progression. For the first time in history, we have seen across all the services now 4 women, soon to be 5, at this 4-star level. And as we noted, it was the Army who started first in 2008 by promoting General Ann Dunwoody to the rank of General Officer. She retired in 2012 as I was just coming on board. And so I got a chance to meet Ann Dunwoody for the first time. Time Magazine wanted to do an interview with us, and so I got a chance to really appreciate the great officer that Ann was, and to kind of compare some notes on some of her lessons learned as I was getting ready to launch down that path myself. So then me in 2012, the Navy followed with their Vice CNO now, Navy Admiral Michelle Howard. She was promoted just last year in July of 2014. And now, most recently our 4th woman at the 4-star level is back in the Air Force with General Lori Robinson. She pinned on her 4-star, became our PACAF commander, Pacific Air Forces commander, in October of last year. So the Air Force now is the first service to have 2 active duty women as 4 stars, and then coming behind me in charge of Air Force Material Command in 7 weeks is Lieutenant General, soon to be General Ellen Polakowski. So we will have our 3rd female 4-star in the United States Air Force. And you know, collectively throughout the whole of the services, we have 63 other women today serving as general officers or admirals in the lower grades. That's pretty much an indication that we are breaking through in terms of what that glass ceiling that we like to talk about. So to give you just some perspective in our Air Force, being a 4-star general puts you in a fairly narrow demographic. So at any point in time, it fluctuates a little bit, really based on the joint world and the combatant commander jobs that are available, but we have about a dozen 4 stars in the Air Force at any point in time. That includes our major command commanders, many of them, most of them 4 stars like I am. We have some of those combatant commanders. We have our chief and our vice chief of staff of the Air Force, and that's it. So to have 2 women in a population size of 12, I think, makes a huge statement on how our Air Force feels about diversity. So here, let me just sum up my reflection on the evolution of women in our military. I maintain that you do not have to look any further than what our military women are doing today around the globe to see how far we have come. Women have proven that they can succeed and they can lead on every battlefield, And I'm proud to have been a part of that progression over the last 3.5 decades. As I get ready in 7 weeks to close the chapter on my uniform service to our country, I am proud of the progress that has been made. That doesn't mean we're done. That's what this symposium is all about. There's lots more opportunity to continue to reflect the fact that women do need to be given fair opportunities to serve in the senior-most levels within all of our services and within all of our ranks. But I gotta tell you, if you look at the retrospective just from my life, we've come a long way.